Okay. Disclaimer today, okay? I love you. You know what that means, right?
We're all in big trouble.
Actually, if you're sitting here today, you probably aren't. That's called preaching to the choir, hopefully. But let me use an illustration here to kind of kick off what I want to, and no pun intended, but to just give you an indication of kind of where we're going today. Just kind of use a little illustration here of the goal behind the game of football, okay? I've watched football with people, whether on TV or at the pit or whatever, and some people that just come out of the kindness of their heart, but they really have no idea what's going on in the field. They have no idea what this is supposed to do or what those 22 guys out on the field are supposed to be doing, okay? So, can somebody help me? Chase, why don't you just come help me? That's the obvious choice, all right? So a football field is 100 yards long with a 10-yard, what's called an end zone on either end, all right? You have a 50-yard line in the middle, okay? So this is the 50-yard line. And he's one team. Yeah, I'm glad you did that now. He's one team, and I'm the other team, okay? Now, the side of the field that I'm on is my turf, okay? And most of the time, a team will start advancing the ball in kind of the enemy's direction, okay, the opponent's direction, from their side of the field, okay? Are you with me? So let's say that the ball is on the 20-yard line. This would be on the 20-yard line of Jamie, okay? Or if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, it would be the 20-yard line of the Pittsburgh Steelers, okay? So I'm trying to get it down there, okay? And I won't go through all the, first down, second down, third down stuff. But the opposing team is trying to keep me out of their space, all right? So as I'm advancing the ball down the field, not that it's not important here, but once I get the ball across the 50-yard line and into my opponent's territory, all right, my opponent is going to become really, really aggressive to try to keep me out of their space. Does that make sense? All right? All right, so go that way. So I'm advancing it across the 50-yard line, and then, does anybody know, once I get it down to the 20-yard line of, let's say, the Baltimore Ravens, boo, yes, once I get it down to the 20-yard line of my opponent, what zone is that called? The red zone, okay? And as soon as the opponent hits the red zone, now the defense is they're really ramped up because we're almost to the end zone. Okay, this is like a very hotly contested piece of real estate right there. And so they're really going to be defensive. All right, and their goal is to keep me out of their space. All right? So thank you, Chase. I wasn't going to have him tackle me or anything. I just wanted him to kind of be there for a visual. And so this morning, I was going to warn everybody to maybe wear a hard hat and some steel-toe shoes this morning. Because we're talking about healthy relating within the church, right? And to be honest with you, this series has kind of gone in a little different direction than what I originally thought. Because I originally thought that we would just offer you some cotton balls on a rock. Okay, and some of you who haven't been here in the last 2 or 3 weeks are going, huh? Okay, I'll explain that a little bit later, okay? We're not just going to offer tips and techniques to soften you up a bit. There's got to be something happening deeper in order for us to relate in a healthy way. But Here's why I use the football illustration. We usually get defensive or offended when someone comes into our space, right? When someone gets too close to our tightly held beliefs, thoughts, opinions, and our way of life. Or when someone, this is so important, and I wish I had time to get in more to this, but I can't. We become defensive or offended when someone comes too close to our inadequacies. When someone comes too close to the wounds from our past. And we do this. We get defensive and we are offended. And we live, I don't have to tell you this, we live in a culture where being offended is normal. It's actually encouraged. Where holding on to the right to be offended is essentially viewed as a human right. And where anyone who disagrees with me, cuts me off in traffic, challenges my perspective, or speaks against my political views will feel some type of retribution. Normally it's verbal, but you know as well as I do, in some severe cases, being offended results in violence. Someone has said that being offended in our culture is an epidemic spreading faster than Ebola. We're so saturated in this mindset that there are even people who get offended by people who get offended. And then there are those who just love to offend people because of our basic human right of freedom of speech. It seems like an endless cycle of people just speaking their minds and subsequent hurt feelings all over the place. Let's define what we're talking about. I've hinted at it just a little bit. To be offended is to be annoyed, angry, resentful, and even vengeful about a perceived insult or disregard for oneself or one's tightly held standards, principles, beliefs, views, and ideas. I'm going to say that a lot, so you might want to write down that definition at some point, but I'm going to repeat it several times, all right? What I just said is basically the standard operating procedure for America right now, isn't it? We're either walking on eggshells around everybody so that we don't offend them, or we swing the pendulum to the other side and act like a bull in a china shop because my standards, principles, beliefs, and ideas have a right to be heard. And with that comes the inevitable result that someone will be offended. Someone's going to get defensive. Somebody's going to get annoyed, angry, resentful, and vengeful about a perceived insult or disregard for who they are or their standards, principles, beliefs, views, and ideas. And it even bleeds over into our tightly held standards, principles, beliefs, views, and ideas about God and the Christian life. It's bizarre, my friends, but we get offended when someone walks with God differently than we do. We get offended when someone holds just a slightly different doctrinal view about this or about that. And unfortunately, the church has succumbed to this. Christians have conformed themselves to the image of the world, Romans 12. We're not supposed to do that, but we have. We've adopted their way of relating to each other. We've been squeezed into their mold of being annoyed, angry, resentful, and vengeful at the drop of a hat about a perceived insult or disregard for who I am as a person or my personal standards, principles, beliefs, views, and ideas. We're offended when a vote doesn't go our way. We're offended when the pastor starts stepping on our toes in his sermons. We're offended when so-and-so ignores us on Sunday morning. When the worship music ventures outside of our comfort zone. When my idea or suggestion isn't listened to or adopted. when we feel like someone has ventured a little too far into my personal space, or actually not far enough into my personal space. Being offended is basically a defense mechanism when we feel threatened. And it's also, get this, it's also a defense mechanism against what may very well be the truth. And even if what someone says is not completely true about who you are or an opinion that you hold, there's this emotion that rises from within us that starts to protect and defend who I am or who I think I am. But in many ways, to be offended and to put up that defense is protecting our false self from being discovered. To cover up or conceal what very well may be true about us. Holding on to the right to be offended is the number one way to solidify your principles, beliefs, and ideas as the standard for everybody else. It's sad but true, but relationships and friendships quickly deteriorate when being offended is our default setting. Walls get built to protect our deeply held personal standards, principles, beliefs, views, and ideas, but it simultaneously suffocates relationships and friendships. My friends, that's a terrible way of relating, isn't it? It's terrible. It's unhealthy. How on God's green earth can we stop this cycle of unhealthy relating? Let me ask you this, and I want either this or something, okay? I want some feedback here. What has been, this might be a one-word answer or something, what has been the result of this offended culture that we live in? What's been the fruit of it?
Chaos.
Chaos? Separation, fragmentation,
Division.
what? Division,
Anger.
anger, yeah, all of the above. That is the fruit of an offended culture, whether it's that culture or whether it's this culture, right? And I want to be painfully honest with you. We must build a culture of being unoffendable at Crossroads, or we won't last much longer. We've got to change our DNA when it comes to living together as a spiritual family. Too many people have left Crossroads over the years simply because they have been offended and they have failed to work through their differences in a godly and mature way. That's not a blanket statement, all right? A few have left in a very healthy way, and I'm very grateful for that. But my friends, if we don't address this problem, we will either cease to exist at some point, or we will become just a dislocated group of selfish individuals that creates this toxic and dysfunctional culture based on our suspicion and fear and distrust of each other. And toxic and dysfunctional are not words that I want Crossroads perceived by in our community. We are not middle schoolers. We are the body of Christ. We are the bride of Christ. We are the sheep of his pasture. We are a disciple-making community. We are to be examples of healthy relating. And here's where I want to commend all of you, because if you still call Crossroads your spiritual family, if you're still a member, if you're still attending, then you've either never been offended by anybody, okay, which is possible, or more likely, you've had to work through a sense of being offended, and you've chosen to work it out in a healthy way that brought reconciliation instead of separation. Let me clarify something before we move on to a couple key scriptures. I'm not saying that we are not sometimes the recipient of someone's offense against us. People will do things and say things that genuinely hurt us. Now, whether they meant to or not, most of the time, we always get the response, I didn't mean to, right? Okay, whether they meant to or whether they didn't mean to, it's just a fact of life. People are going to do things and say things that hurt us. What I'm trying to address this morning is our reaction to it. Whether it's a legitimate offense or something that just came out the wrong way and hurt our feelings. We have to undergo, as individuals and as a church, a deep transformation into a healthy way of relating that doesn't keep fracturing us. We have got to show the world a better way. What is that better way? I'm going to take you to two key passages. First one is John 17. I want you to look at this. So if you got your old-fashioned Bible, if you got your app, whatever, if you got it memorized, that's great. Okay? John 17, verses 20 to 23. I'm going to wait for you to get there because I want you to see it. John 17, starting in verse 20. Jesus is praying. Okay, he's praying in solitude, and he's been praying to his Father, and he started off praying specifically for his 12 disciples, the ones that have followed him closely. But in verse 20, he makes a transition, and he says this. He's praying to the Father, and he says, my prayer is not for them alone. My prayer is not only for my 12 disciples. He said, I also pray for those who will believe in me through their message. That's us, folks. He's praying for us. Verse 21, that all of them may be what? One, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be what? One as we are one. Verse 23, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete what? Unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Here's another translation. It says this. Remember, Jesus is praying to his Father. He says, I'm praying not only for them, but also for those who will believe in me because of them and their witness about me. The goal is for all of them to become one heart and mind, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, so they might be one heart and mind with us. Then the world may believe that you, in fact, sent me. The same glory you gave me, I gave them, so they'll be as unified and together as we are. I in them and you in me. Then they'll be mature in this oneness and give the godless world evidence that you sent me and loved them in the same way that you loved me. That is just a wonderful concoction of words, isn't it? Only Jesus could pray something like that. And here's the question I want you to answer. What, according to what Jesus just prayed here, what is the greatest evidence that the Father sent Jesus and that the Father loves us just like he loves Jesus? What is the greatest evidence of that? What will convince the world of that according to what Jesus prayed here? What is it? Unity. Okay, just let me pull some phrases from what I just read. The goal is for all of them to be one heart and mind, so that they may be one heart and mind with us, so that they'll be as unified and together as we are. Then they'll be mature in this oneness and give the godless world evidence that you sent me. Question, if that's true, and it is, then what does the spirit of being offended and reacting out of a defensive spirit, what does that result in? What is the fruit of being constantly offended at every turn? You already gave me the answer a few minutes ago. What's it? Disunity. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely not unity, not oneness, not togetherness, not one heart and mind. It results in division. And if unity, oneness, togetherness, and one heart and mind, if all of that convinces a godless world that Jesus was sent from the Father, then what do you think disunity and division communicates to them? Exactly. God is not real. That all of this is a joke. My friends, the best preacher, the best band, the best stage show, the best discipleship program, the best location, the best building, the best staff, the best marketing will never be enough to convince a godless world that Jesus was sent from the Father. All of that will never be enough to overcome division in a church. Unity, oneness, togetherness, one heart and mind, that is what convinces a godless world. Okay, first question. What convinces a godless world that Jesus was sent from the Father? What? Unity. Okay, what else? I'm going to take you to another passage in John 13. I want you to turn there as well. John 13, starting in verse 34. Again, probably a familiar passage to you. Jesus said, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Verse 35, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples." How? If you love one another. Question, how will people know that we are serious about following Jesus, that we're serious about being disciples? By how many people we have coming to church? By how many services or campuses or pastors we have? By how popular we are in the community or how involved we are? Answer the question, how will people know? By our love for one another. Not even our love for them yet. Our love for all these people sitting in this room. So if they don't see us loving one another, my friends, even when life gets messy with each other, even when we don't agree with each other, even when someone kind of ticks you off and makes you mad, what will that tell them? God's not real. It will tell them that all of this is a big joke. I want you to listen to the following verses, maybe jot down the reference so you can go back and highlight or underline these later. Proverbs 10:12 says, "Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses." Proverbs 19:11, a man's discretion or a man's discernment makes him slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook a transgression. I didn't even know that was an option. I did. But we live as though we didn't even think that was an option. A glory to overlook a transgression? Here's a longer passage. It's from 1 Peter 4, starting in verse 7. I want you to turn to that one too, because I want you to see it as I read it. 1 Peter 4, starting in verse 7. Peter says, "The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of sober mind so that you may pray." Verse 8, "Above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. And I'll be honest with you folks, the last thing I want to do is love somebody who's offended me or sinned against me in some way. One of the hardest sayings that Jesus ever said was, bless those who curse you, pray for those who persecute you. It's hard to bless somebody that just cursed you. I don't want to overlook it. I want to point it out to them. I don't want to overlook it. She needs to know how offended I am about what she said. Because she's clueless. Am I right? Here's the deal, though. Listen closely here. I'll explain it after I say it. You cannot start loving someone at the moment they've offended you. You understand that? You have to love them deeply long before they've offended you. So that when someone inevitably gets into your space, gets into your red zone, gets into your end zone, in a way that upsets you, you have your default setting set on love. Not on getting annoyed, angry, resentful, and vengeful. Remember what James said in our study in James at the beginning of the year. Human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Human anger just makes things more complicated. My offendedness, your offendedness, is not helpful. It's not healthy. It's actually detrimental. And even though it makes you feel vindicated on the inside, it is a false vindication. It is a false sense of feeling or being right. And it does not promote love. Peter was right. The end of all things is near. And if all things was near for him, then it's really near for us, right? In other words, and here's what I think Peter was trying to say, kind of in our vernacular, you know what? We don't have time for games, my friends. The end is near. We don't have time to be annoyed, angry, resentful, and vengeful. We don't have time to be offended. And I know I'm going to sound like an old fire and brimstone preacher with this next statement, but there are people dying and going to hell while we sit around and are offended about somebody not saying hi to us on a Sunday morning. And don't think that that hasn't been the case here, because it has. There are much bigger things to fry, my friends, than my opinion, wasn't accepted or it didn't carry the weight that I thought it should. The only thing we have time for is love. That's the only thing we have time for. And Peter went on to tell us what it looks like. He said, we're supposed to be hospitable to each other without grumbling. That's love. We're supposed to use our gifts to serve each other. That's love. We're supposed to be stewards and conduits of God's grace to each other. That's love. And when we speak to each other, we're supposed to speak as if we were saying the very words of God. That's love. Okay? You're going to walk out of here with two things this morning. How will we, back up a little bit, how are we to convince a godless world that Jesus was sent from the Father? Unity. How are people to know that we are disciples of Jesus? Love. Unity and love. And my friends, that has got to be the DNA of Crossroads from this point forward, or we will not survive. Are you with me? We have a beautiful chance to transition not only from location to location in a few months, but we have a beautiful opportunity to transition our DNA. And when things get messy, when somebody ticks us off, you know what that's an opportunity for? Unity and love. Not to walk out the door. Unity and love. Let me finish with an excerpt. A little bird yesterday gave me an excerpt from a book. Francis Chan, who was a pastor out in California, he started a church in his house years ago, 40 people, it grew to 4,000. And when it grew to 4,000, he said, something's wrong. Something's wrong. And he went back and he just started planting churches in his house again. And he wrote a book called The Forgotten God. It's a book about the Holy Spirit. And we talked about the Spirit. He said this in that book. He said, a while back, a former gang member joined our church. He was heavily tattooed and rough around the edges, but he was curious to see what the church was like. He had a relationship with Jesus and seemed fairly involved with the church. After a few months, I found out the guy was no longer coming to our church. When asked why he didn't come anymore, he gave the following explanation. I guess I had the wrong idea of what church was going to be like. When I joined the church, I thought it was going to be like joining a gang. You see, in the gangs, we just weren't nice to each other once a week. We were family. And with that, Chan says, that killed me because I knew that what he expected is what the church is intended to be. It saddened me to think that a gang could paint a better picture of commitment, loyalty, and family than the local church body. The church is intended to be a beautiful place of community, a place where wealth is shared, and when one suffers, everyone suffers, a place where when one rejoices, everyone rejoices, a place where everyone experiences real love and acceptance in the midst of great honesty about our brokenness. Yet most of the time, this is not even close to how we describe our churches. Without the Spirit of God in our midst, working in us, guiding us, and living and loving through us, we will never be the kind of people who will make up that kind of community. There is no such thing as a real believer who doesn't have the Holy Spirit, or a real church without the Spirit. It's just not possible. But what is possible is that we would individually and corporately quench and hinder the Spirit's activity in and through our lives. I remember back to our study in Nehemiah years ago. And the one thing Nehemiah did was that he confessed. He confessed things that he wasn't even originally a part of. But he knew that confession was one way for the Spirit of God to move even freer and more within the situation he was in. And my friends, I want us to confess this morning. I'm going to confess. I have been defensive. I have been offended. I have handled it wrongly. And I believe that that spirit does not belong in this church. Perhaps you have been defensive. Perhaps you have been offended. You know what? We need to kick that demon right out of our church, or we will not survive. I'm going to give us a couple minutes of silence here. And I'm serious about it because we can't, you know what the definition of insanity is, right? Doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. We're not going to do the same thing again, folks. We're going to change. And so if there's an individual or corporate confession that needs to happen right now, let it happen in the next few minutes as we sit in silence.